In 2020, I reached the lowest point in my life. Sleeping most of the day, binging pornography and video games, skipping workouts, not eating, and experiencing this identity crisis that had me wondering, what was the point? Why was I even alive? But it didn't just hit me out of the blue, rather it was a culmination of the past 10 years of my life. Throughout the entirety of my teenage years, I was enslaved to the addictions of video games and pornography, which combined with my extreme insecurity and social anxiety, crippled my ability to engage with people, especially girls. My complete lack of mental control made me extremely susceptible to emotions, which not only made me appear, well, feminine, but would trigger me to further give in to all of my bad habits. I was in an infinite loop of failure. This eradicated my self-trust, which made any efforts to change that much harder. But deep down, I had a sense of self-awareness. I knew that if I didn't change, I would doom myself not only to a life of mediocrity, but constant mental suffering, trying to escape through cheap pleasures and distractions until the pain becomes too much to bear and, something really bad happens. I wanted to be better. I wanted to be happier. I wanted to attract others. I wanted to be successful. And if you relate to any of my story, then this guide will be perfect for you. Because not only is it how I completely fixed my life, but reinvented myself. I now navigate my life free of the past bad habits and addictions, and I'm attracting the people, success, and opportunities that not only create a fixed life, but an ideal life. And look, this isn't like the majority of self-improvement guides on this platform that are like, clean your room and exercise. Rather, it is in-depth teachings that will truly bring forth change in your life. I've been blessed to help thousands of people achieve the changes we've discussed, and I look forward to doing it with you as soon as possible because the world is changing. This gap between the mediocre, the NPCs, and the truly outstanding outliers in the world is widening. And those caught in the middle are forced to change or fall to the bottom. So join me in this battle against the mind virus that is turning the majority of the population into unconscious NPCs, against the degradation of society we're seeing, and most importantly, against any and everything that holds you back from the life you desire. Because if you don't master yourself, then you will never master life. And thus the freedom, success, and relationships you would like to have will forever remain out of reach. I've compiled all of my best information and actionable steps from my content into this guide, so please just commit to watching this guide so that you can learn principles that changed my life so that you can change yours. Enjoy.
My focus has skyrocketed, my direction is clear, and I've been experiencing the most progress made in my entire life. So here are the mistakes that are destroying your productivity and how to fix them. And mistake number one is you are stuck in a dopamine loop. And I'm not talking about spending hours scrolling on TikTok. We all know that's bad for us. This dopamine trap hides itself in plain sight and even convinces you that it is valuable. Now there's two main loops you get stuck in, and the first is through educational content. I used to constantly listen to educational podcasts and YouTube videos throughout my entire day. Regardless of whatever I was actually doing, I had an endless dopamine drip making me feel productive all the time. I kept going from video to video, podcast to podcast, because I felt that the best advice that was going to change everything was just around the corner. When deep down, I already knew the tasks I should be doing, but since I was learning so much, I felt accomplished regardless if I did them or not. Now obviously it is beneficial to take in new ideas and information, but the key is to have specific times when you do it, separate from your work time. For example, I may read a little bit in the morning, listen to a podcast while on a walk or at the gym, and I'll watch a YouTube video before I go to bed. However, when it's time to work, it's time to work, and those core goals of the day are going to be accomplished. And when you are consuming content, get that one nugget of information that lights your brain up, instead of just continuing to consume content, letting your mind overfill like a cup in the sink with water running in it, stop what you're doing and write it down, go for a walk, just sit with the information and let your mind generate organic ideas off of it. And the second major dopamine trap is when you won't shut up about your goals. We all know that person who is always talking about what they're working on. Oh, this is gonna be big, bro. This is it. I'm gonna do this and I'm gonna do this and this is gonna happen. It's gonna be epic. However, with most people, we often notice that their actual position in life hasn't changed at all. What's happening is he is chasing the dopamine hits that his brain gives him from just talking about his goals and what he's working on. And these hits are rewarding him just as if he was actually putting in the work. So avoid this mental masturbation cycle and get pleasure from the tasks themselves. If you continue to watch this video, I will explain how that happens. The second mistake is you are not engaging in deep work and entering flow state. Deep work is a term coined by Cal Newport, author of the book deep work, and it is undistracted, uninterrupted, hyper-focused work at your highest mental output possible. Deep work is not tasks such as scrolling through your email or scanning groceries. In fact, Newport describes this as shallow work because it's just mindless. The main instances of deep work is when you're learning a skill, mastering a skill, or applying the skill to increase your output. So the concept of deep working is actually pretty simple. You just focus as hard as you can for as long as you can, and thus obviously your highest quality results will be produced. Plus, the process of deep work typically results in you entering flow state. Deep work is an action itself, however, flow is a state of mind. And when you enter flow, all of the unnecessary parts of your brain shut down. You don't get tired, you don't get bored, and you become fully present and lost in the task at hand. This is why it's the best mental state for doing things, because you are quite literally in the zone. And this happens when a balance is created between the challenge of the task and your capabilities. Not too easy where it's boring, but not too difficult where it's frustrating and undoable. This is why flow state is almost always entered during a deep work session. Plus, it feels amazing. When you're in that high output, high efficiency state, you are fully aware of how productive you are being, and you begin to gain pleasure from the work itself. This is also the reason why mistake 2.5, multitasking, is typically frowned upon, because multitasking doesn't really exist. All you're doing is forcing your focus to go back and forth, killing any chances of deep work and flow. And if you haven't realized already, flow state is a type of mindfulness. So the more capable you are of being mindful, the easier it will be for you to enter flow state. And if you want to raise your levels of focus and mindfulness in a matter of minutes, I have a completely free 5-day guided meditation series that does exactly that. Link in the description. Because we live in an information economy, someone is always trying to shove information down our throats, typically via these fancy rectangles that we keep by our side all the time. The endless conversation that is social media is constantly trying to suck us in. The slot machine of new content makes it feel novel and productive every single time we open the app. Plus, thanks to instant messaging, everyone is able to interrupt our work all the time. So obviously keep your phone on silent, keep it out of your vision, but this leads me into the next mistake, and that is taking breaks. But I use the Pomodoro technique, so I need to take a 5-minute break every 25 minutes. No, you don't. Most of us are fully capable of working longer than 25 minutes, and you're just bribing yourself with the little dopamine hits. If you're only working for 25-minute periods, just itching for that timer to go off so you can open Instagram and look at butt cheeks. So the reason why the Pomodoro technique kind of makes sense is because the ratio of rest required for a period of focused work is not 1-to-1. So yes, you could work for 30 minutes and then 5 minutes is enough to refresh your brain. However, you got to keep in mind that if you're only working for these short periods of time, you're not going to enter flow state and you keep having to disengage and re-engage in deep work. Instead of this, organically take a break when you've hit a wall or you've fully maxed out your mental energy in the deep work. But don't go sit on the couch and flood your brain with noise from your phone or your television. Rather, go on a walk, go to the gym, have a meal, something that allows your mind to truly rest. Now, a lot of this has to do with scheduling. So mistake number 4 is that you lack structure. Now, this was a huge issue for me because, like I said, I would just wing it every single day. So not only was my brain distracted and directionless, but I didn't even plan for times to engage in deep work. So once I added structure and made deep work a ritual, my output skyrocketed. So here are the 4 types of scheduling for deep work according to Cal Newport. Number 1 is seclusion. This is the most extreme method where you remove as much shallow work from your life as possible, meaning almost 100% of your time is in deep work. We see this when authors and musicians kind of go off the grid for a few months or even a few years, only to return with their best work yet. Unfortunately, this is quite unrealistic for most people because we have jobs and responsibilities that just don't allow for this type of schedule. But for those who can, this is best because deep work becomes your default. Plus, you're most likely in flow state for a majority of the time as well. The second type of scheduling is periodic. This is when you would carve out portions of your week, month, or even year to solely focus on deep work. Newport says that these periods need to be at least a full day long to reach the highest intensity of deep work. I prefer this method the most, but I do mix it with number 3, which is daily scheduling. We see this a lot with people who wake up super early in the morning and then for those first few hours, they are solely entrenched in deep work. This is when you block out the same time each day that is fully dedicated to deep work. The schedule is the most realistic for people to form a habit out of it because you're blocking out the same amount of time each day for deep work. But unlike method 1 and 2, because you don't have a full day dedicated to deep work, Newport says that you will not enter maximum focus. Lastly is number 4, and that is just doing it whenever you can. This is the most flexible schedule, but the least successful. Due to us constantly having to switch in and out of that mental state, most of us won't be able to do it reliably. I don't really understand this one, but I guess if your life is just that ridiculously bonkers, this is the only one you can do. Additional ways you can add structure to your life is scheduling internet time, adding strict deadlines to follow, and if you really want to get deep, plan out every minute of your day. Not saying you'll hit it perfectly, but you will have a very rigid structure to follow, and then it's just a matter of discipline. Develop a growth mindset. NPCs have a fixed mindset. They believe their potential is already determined, and if they fail, they just view it as the limits of their abilities. So they always see things as, well, I'm either good at it or I'm not. They hate to be challenged, only sticking to what they know, and if they get frustrated, they give up. This is why you'll see them never evolve as people, because they just want to stay in their own little bubbles, not try anything new. And if they see other people doing better than them, they will project their insecurities onto them, because the cause of this entire mindset is their ego. They will work very hard to protect that ego through seeking validation from other NPCs. However, for us, we want to have a growth mindset where we understand that failures and shortcomings are just opportunities to learn, and thus we will embrace challenges in life because they help us grow. We won't allow any cognitive dissonance to blind us from other perspectives, and we won't put ourselves in a box, because we know that our efforts determine our abilities. And you may think of growth mindset as some very basic motivational advice, but the reason it's harped on so much and the reason it's in this video is because of the truth and depth behind it. And look around, practically every single successful person has a growth mindset to some extent. Think deeper and more critically. NPCs obviously don't think deeply about anything. Even with topics they seem to be pretty knowledgeable on, they're usually just regurgitating information from others. Plus, they're constantly distracting and stimulating themselves to the point that they never give their minds an actual chance to process anything, which is why certain people seem so surface level about everything. And this can hurt them in many ways, because when a problem arises in their life, they will outsource the solution instead of looking inward. And before we start thinking deeply about things, we have to cut back on the overstimulation, because if you're constantly bombarding your brain with video games, Netflix, Instagram boobies, one, you're lowering your baseline dopamine, which is lowering your default level of motivation, but two, your brain will never be able to fully process ideas. Plus, honestly, at this point, it's common knowledge and self-improvement that too much mindless entertainment should just be avoided in general. No problem can withstand the assault of sustained thinking. That is a quote from famous French writer Voltaire. First off, to think deeply will require you sometimes to challenge your own beliefs, which is part of the growth mindset we discussed earlier. You'll be deploying your growth mindset, you'll be deploying your self-awareness to fully understand things, understand your biases, have that pause before making decisions on things. However, for the more big ideas or problems you're working on, you may think you need to just sit down and squeeze everything you possibly can out of your mind until some epic realization occurs, which of course has its place. It's always good to start just by writing things out, visualizing them. That alone is going to open your mind and perspective to fully perceive what you're thinking about. But the key is that after doing this, you need to employ your subconscious mind to continue processing whatever problem or idea you're working on. And this may kind of sound like wooey nonsense to you at first, but it really isn't. Our minds have built-in mechanisms for solving problems this way. For example, we've all woken up in the morning to some realization or had an awesome idea in the shower. And this is because our subconscious was already processing those ideas, and we gave it the opportunity to let that emerge back up into consciousness, because we were doing an activity that allowed our mind to just rest openly, compared to being overstimulated or even overfocused, because we cannot force out those deep thoughts. That actually inhibits the process, and it explains why a lot of people, such as writers or musicians, get creative block. So to simplify, take time to think, but also take time not to think, where your mind can just rest openly. And that does not mean playing video games or watching YouTube. No, your mind needs to be resting. Think about some of the biggest male motivational, inspirational figures online. Pretty much all of them are praised and respected for some form of suffering that they willingly put themselves through. We attach to embracing suffering on both ends of the spectrum, from Jordan Peterson telling us to just clean your room, man, all the way to David Goggins, who ran 100 miles with broken feet while peeing blood. Without the suffering, there is no development. You're watching me, I'm a self-development YouTuber. You want to improve yourself, you are going to have to suffer. Nietzsche said it best when he said, "The discipline of suffering, of great suffering. Do you not know that only this discipline has created all enhancements of man so far?" I mean, even in the Bible, the peak of the story of the Bible is Christ willingly undergoing horrific suffering. However, there are different kinds of suffering, and we need to understand the difference between unchosen and chosen suffering. Unchosen suffering is things that were brought onto us completely out of our control, such as the tragic death of a loved one, illness, injuries, accidents. Now, obviously, this is something we don't want to bring on more than we already get through life itself. This is not something we're going to pursue. However, when it does happen, I will explain later in the video how to deal with it. Versus chosen suffering, as the name implies, is things that we choose to endure. And everyone has forms of this. And when I understood this and I look back on my life, all of my development was through suffering. I'm sure a lot of you, like me, go to the gym and lift weights. We are willingly, consciously inflicting suffering onto ourselves in forms of fatigue, muscle tears, the burn, the inflammation, the soreness, because we know that along the line, we will be reaping rewards from it. We will be reaping development of our physiques and of our mind. The only reason I'm here today is because of suffering. I left the comfortable path of continuing to live at home, go to my cheap community college, work my super easy job at Academy Sports and Outdoors, to move into an apartment in a studio room, not even a full-size bedroom, with roaches in the ghetto, to chase my dreams, because I felt like the suffering, I knew that the suffering will be worth it, and that through the suffering and the development of myself, by forcing myself out of my comfort zone, moving across the state, would push me into something that I want to become. And that completely changed my life, and I will later explain how I'd actually use it as a tool to combat the bad forms of suffering. So obviously, I'm not saying we should just suffer all the time for our entire lives, because who wants a life just of endless turmoil and despair? Before I go into how to suffer the right way and the different types of suffering, I need to tell you this. In reality, there is no escape from suffering. The only difference is if you continue to try to escape, run away, distract yourself, chase pleasures, you are just going to doom yourself to a life of mediocrity. Imagine if you forgo the suffering, chase comfort, chase pleasure for years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, your whole life. Imagine the suffering then. You have nothing to look back on. All those days led up to this. That suffering, that failure of life, that lack of fulfillment is much worse than any of the little discomforts I will lean into now. And the first thing we need to do is understand the difference between unconscious suffering and conscious suffering. Unconscious suffering is what 90% of people struggle with. And the worst part about this suffering is that it's not even real. This is the depression, anxiety, self-doubt, dealing with past trauma, all these mental downward spirals that a lot of people go down is forms of this unconscious suffering. The reason I call it unconscious, even though you're obviously awake and dealing with it, is because you're not being truly conscious or mindful about it. You are trapped in the default mode network of your brain, and all of this suffering is being brought upon you by yourself, your own ego. Think about it. If you're suffering from anxiety, you are stressing about the future, something that doesn't even exist yet, something that is not happening in reality, right now, in the present. When you are depressed because of something in the past, you are upset about something that no longer exists. It doesn't exist. It's not happening. It is all you are reacting to is a memory, a thought that is popping into your consciousness. When things happen in your day-to-day life that upset you, piss you off, anger you, frustrate you, upset you, this is all in the default mode network, the monkey mind. And for a lot of people, their brain will continue to pull them down a horrible path instead of leading them to a path of improvement. And the key to combating these forms of suffering, which almost always isn't beneficial because, like I explained, it isn't real, and is to practice true stoicism by dropping back prospectively and observing these emotions, these temporary emotions that are not real as what they are. They are just appearances in consciousness, and they will pass if you just observe them, focus on them, not identify with them, pulled back perspective. Remember, they will pass. The reason why this is so harmful is because most people do not understand how to do that. These thoughts come in, anxieties, depressions come in, and they identify with them, and they will stay in that mind state for days, months, years, and that is where it becomes truly self-destructive. And notice how I'm saying you have to stay with these uncomfortable thoughts, stay with the suffering, and sit with it and truly observe it, truly fully be there, compared to most people's reactions, which is to band-aid it by escaping, by chasing pleasures, by distracting themselves so they don't have to face their own thoughts. And this is the frame of mind you will be in when you do your chosen suffering, because you are willingly leaning into the friction, because you know that the outcome is going to be good for you. It is going to develop you, even if it sucks and it's brutal in the moment, in the present. Also understand that stoicism, being able to observe thoughts, observe emotions, and attach to them, is a skill. It is a skill because you have to build up the mental muscles necessary to be able to do it better.
Hey you, yeah you, if you're finding this guide valuable, then imagine what you would get from mental mastery. My complete self-development masterclass consisting of the exact information and protocols that I used to completely reprogram my mind, which unlocked my highest self, capable of my highest levels of confidence, focus, discipline, mental control, and anything else required to become the version of myself that can make any goal I set achievable. I don't want to take up any more of your time. If you want to learn more after this video, there's a link in the description. Okay.
Understand that you don't have to start by running 100 miles and breaking all the bones in your feet. It can start as simple as not even introducing anything new to your life and just cutting out some of the comforts, the distractions, the bad habits, the pleasures, because even just the absence of that is going to cause suffering within you. And the thing about this is I can give you plenty of examples like, oh, start to go to the gym, take cold showers here and there, force yourself to meditate, force yourself to read, force yourself to write, force yourself to go on a walk instead of watching TV. And if you want to even get more extreme, quit the job you hate to force yourself to learn how to do the skills that will get you into the business you want to do. Force yourself to go interact with a bunch of people despite your crippling social anxiety, because you know that you'll become good with people. And if it does mean you have to go out and run 100 miles and physically hurt yourself, break the feet in your bones like Goggins did, so be it. You will come out of it a better man. And you'll even add meaning to your life, because you will be adding meaning to your suffering. And like I said earlier, life is suffering. Life is literally the biggest, best, and most rewarding video game ever. And if you view it as such and adopt the perspectives we're going to discuss, you will begin to level up and be able to achieve any of the objectives you decide to pursue. And that's important because if you don't level up, you're an NPC. NPCs maintain the minimum stats necessary to just stay in the game. Most of their playtime is spent just grinding low-level quests that don't even grant them much XP or skills. Instead, these quests actually benefit other players, and they only leave the NPC with just enough to continue playing. But if you're watching this, you're not much of an NPC. So here is how to view life as the game it is and win. One thing video games have that is better compared to the real world is structure. You always have some kind of objective, a map, a compass guiding you towards the goals. In the real world, it's not so simple, and we need to select our own quests and then pursue the correlating objectives. Now there's hundreds, if not thousands, of different skills, objectives, quests. So what we need to do is take a step back and establish some kind of loose, semi-long form goals. This can be 6 months, a year, 5 years, even 10 years from now. But essentially it boils down to, what do you want your life, and thus what do you want the version of yourself to be in the future? For example, I guess my quest would be creating a successful personal brand on the internet. So I set a goal for 115,000 subscribers by the end of this year. So when we go even more micro and look at my day-to-day objectives, my levers I need to pull each day, it looks something like record and upload some short or long form video. And you can pursue multiple quests at once as long as they're not super conflicting, and some even complement each other. For example, I'm also pursuing raising my physical and mental health. So my daily objectives are things like eat 200 grams of protein, meditate for 10 to 20 minutes, lift weights for an hour, and go on a walk. But we don't actually need to know the exact outcome of our quest, even though it might be helpful to visualize what you think it might look like. But taking some time to realize what you truly want out of this life is at least going to give you a general direction. Kind of like how some games just have that compass that points you in the general direction of the next objective. Sometimes things aren't fun and we lack the motivation and discipline to do certain things. But here's how you add a sense of challenge and perhaps even fun to even the little things in life. And that is that you need to gamify everything. Start to view all these little challenges throughout your day as a little boss battle or a mini game. This will help shift your perspective, so now anytime you feel that friction towards something you really should do, you can be like, oh, this is a little boss battle. Like, I need to push through the friction and beat it. For example, I take cold showers every morning, and they never get any less cold. However, when I feel that friction, that hesitancy, I know I'm gonna be uncomfortable for like 45 seconds. I make a game out of it. I see how quickly from when I turn on the water can I get in and under the water. Plus, when you view things this way, it may result in an even higher dopamine release from that task, which will reward you and give you even more motivation. However, it's important that you keep in mind that throughout all this, you need to be selecting challenges and bosses that are somewhat around your level. Because if they're too low, there's really no challenge, you don't get much XP, and worst of all, it's just boring. But if they're too hard, you have a very high chance of losing that battle, which is just going to demotivate you. One of the reasons most people complain that the game of life is too hard is because they aren't starting with small enough challenges. This results in just feeling overwhelmed, I can't do this, I'm not a high enough level, when in reality, you just need to go and face some zombies before you work your way up to the Ender Dragon. The perfect challenge is something that's not too far out of reach, but also not too easy. Coincidentally, this exact window is what tends to unlock flow state, which is essentially epic gamer mode, where your focus is locked in, you're thinking creatively, and you're enjoying it as you do it. A great way to start to gamify things is simply just track your habits. I've been recently making it a habit to cut down on my phone screen time, so every day, at the end of the day, I check my screen time. I see both how long I was on as well as what apps I was on, and then I think the next day I'm gonna strive to hit a new PR in that. You can do this with essentially anything because most likely all you need to do is just write some things down, maybe some boxes to check off, and eventually start to set up and strive for your personal bests, hitting records in the things. So through implementing this framework and these perspectives and starting to level up skills that pertain to health, wealth, spirituality, and socialization, you will be on the best path towards self-actualization, becoming the highest level, best version of yourself. Stop identifying with thoughts. We navigate our lives with a constant internal monologue, narrating every single event and emotion that we experience. And what our mind does by default is it identifies with each and every thing that pops in. And the more it cements that identity, even if the inputs are negative, which they often are. One of the core realizations in mindfulness, consciousness, meditation is you realize that this internal dialogue is not you, and that we can simply pull back and observe these thoughts and emotions, and they will pass without rewiring our brain negatively. Meditating is what granted me this ability. It wasn't like this one session ego death crazy realization. Rather, it was building up this mental muscle of mindfulness. And this heightened awareness would carry into my days. And since I was more aware, I was more self-aware. And thus I would notice and observe all my thoughts and actions. And I would realize what I truly liked and what I truly didn't like about myself. And as you do this over time, it will lead you further and further to becoming your ideal self. If you're interested in trying this at all, just consider checking out my free 5-day guided meditation series in the description. And throughout this process, you will finally conquer your ego, and then you will realize the ego is a great servant, just a shit master. If you actually want to fully become your true self, then you have to acknowledge all of the very things you are currently suppressing. You must implement your shadow. All of us have these parts of us that we don't think aligns with our true self, so we try as hard as we can to resist it and reject it, just trying to create a blind spot in our minds. The key is not to kill our shadow, but to assimilate with it. This process has 3 steps. Step 1 is to accept your shadow. It is part of us whether we like it or not. Step 2 is to learn about your shadow, and this also requires mindfulness. Pay consistent attention to the thoughts, the fantasies, and the impulses that the shadow introduces into your consciousness. And once you finally reach the point where you understand exactly what your shadow is, what the desires are, you have to start negotiating with it. Find out what is and isn't useful about these urges and desires. Once again, meditation is great for this, link in the description, as well as journaling to yourself, because the more you are self-aware, the more you are shadow-aware. You'll be surprised how you can take a seemingly dark desire or insecurity and actually turn it into a force for good. An example of this is someone who just has all these dark desires to be a degenerate, go out, hook up with girls, or watch a lot of porn, and maybe being like, hey, shadow, I know you want a lot of attention and validation from girls, but you know what, we'll get more of that if we improve ourselves and become super high value and successful. And the shadow's like, yo, this guy kind of spitting. Very basic example, but if you can figure out what your shadow is and negotiate with it, you will unlock some of the most powerful motivating factors you've ever had. Even if you're watching this right now and you think everything is going good, you may be on the path I'm going to describe to a very rude awakening, because there are 3 crucial mistakes that I made and I'm seeing a lot of other guys make that will act as a rubber band. You'll make a little bit of progress until eventually the tension in the band builds up and snaps you back into your starting point. And when that rubber band snaps back, it is painful. I remember the days where I was doing good on NoFap, and then all of a sudden you hit the 3-peat in one day. And if you don't acknowledge these 3 mistakes and thus cut the rubber band, you may look back in a few years and wonder, what went wrong? Left with nothing but some surface level progression that you should have surpassed a month into your journey. Discovering these mistakes, I was able to actually rewire them into forces that will propel you even further on your journey towards long-term success. Starting off, you simply have too many levers. Your attention is too scattered. Because we jump into self-development and we're watching all these different YouTube videos, we're jumping from topic to topic within self-development, and there's all this pressure on us to get to these levels of these people that we see. We get scattered. Therefore, our efforts are scattered and we are overwhelmed with things that we feel like we should be doing. Oh man, I need to quit porn and do an ice bath and start an agency and sleep with 50 girls and read 20 books. And granted, there are plenty of things you can do that are good. However, it's like if your main goal is you wanted to be a bodybuilder, but also wanted to compete in strongman, but also wanted to be a swimmer and a crossfitter and a mountain climber. All of those things are within fitness, but if you try all those things, you will not be exceptional in any of them. And what I mean by too many many levers is you have too many goals, and thus you have too many daily tasks you feel like you need to do, or you just have loose concepts of things you want to achieve and they're not specific whatsoever. Both are very bad. What you need is a core goal, your main thing that you envision you achieving. This is your I made it. This is the heart of everything your self-development is kind of towards. Okay, so you have that, right? Everything else needs to take the back seat. The key to this is you need to rank these levers in terms of priority and then ritualize your day. Every single day you can, try to make it almost identical. One way to help with this is to have checkpoints. For example, my first checkpoint of the day is when I make my breakfast smoothie, because that's what propels me into going outside, taking a walk, taking a shower, getting ready for the gym. And then my next checkpoint is completing my workout, and then thus and so forth. It is also very important to remember to just pull one lever at a time. Finish it. Do not jump back and forth. Do not multitask, because that will kill your efficiency. One thing at a time. What is the one lever I should be pulling right now? The next mistake is you are not thinking long term enough. Now, we somewhat solved this by talking about the 5-year goal, but if you are just simply focusing on the end of the week, the end of this month in terms of your self-development journey and the outcome, you're not going to make it very far, because you're focused on almost instant gratification compared to long-term goals a year, 5-year, 10-year down the line. If you have a narrow focus, a zoomed in lens on the timeline, you are going to forget the big picture. Compared to when you zoom out and can see the big picture, you will understand much more clearly what you need to be doing at that exact moment where you're at on the timeline, as well as develop patient urgency. Because this isn't you develop a goal 5 years from now and you're just kind of chilling because, oh, it's 5 years from now. Because if someone's doing that, it means that they have pussy goals. And that's not you, right? So my definition of patient urgency is you have goals on a long-term horizon that you are patient for, but goals so big that you must act urgent to actualize them. And these two mistakes actually happened to me very recently, like a year ago. A little bit after I started transitioning my content more towards self-development, I was in a spot where I was posting self-development stuff, but I wasn't exactly getting the growth that I dreamed of. And I was also hanging around my good friend Caleb, who is a very successful e-commerce wizard of a teenager, and he has made a lot of money drop shipping, and I wanted to try drop shipping. And all of this was time I could have been making content, could have been getting better as a creator. I wanted to make a quick buck, so I was building sites, doing all these little intricate things, setting up the AliExpress stuff, ordering the products, filming product videos and advertisements myself, and running TikTok ads, shelling out my own money to make it work. And all 3 of my stores failed. And it was only after they all 3 failed and I was just wasting too much money that I reflected on it and realized the only justification I provided myself for why I was doing this was because I was like, oh, well, if I just start making a bunch of money real quick, it'll free me up and I'll have more freedom and money to invest into my content and make more content. My only justification, even though it sucked, was actually reminding me of my actual purpose and my passion and what I actually care about is the YouTube. And the reason I did all that in the first place was because I made the 2 mistakes. I was scattering my attention, introducing way too many things I felt like I needed to be doing, too many daily levers, as well as I completely forgot or was ignoring my long-term goal. My long-term goal had nothing to do with Shopify stores, drop shipping, AliExpress lamps. And I'm seeing this a lot in other kids. They are going ham on the gym. They think they need to be going out on dates and getting girls all the time. They're trying to start an agency with some service that they don't even care about. And the actions they're taking either represents they want short-term gratification or shows that their long-term goals lack clarity. So figure out what your thing is. For me, obviously, it was YouTube. And then do not forget it. Remind yourself of the long-term goals and don't get shiny object syndrome. However, mistake number 3 goes under almost everybody's radar, and that is SSS, subconscious self-sabotage. Our human brain can process up to 11 million bits of information per second. However, our conscious mind can only process 40 total bits. And unfortunately, what we tend to do when we get into self-improvement is we're introducing all these things into our consciousness, but it just floats on the surface of the water until it drifts away. It does not sink down into the ocean that is the subconscious mind. That is responsible for all the subconscious systems that you don't notice, but that dictate all of your actions. And the scary thing is, these systems do not listen to you. You can tell your conscious mind something and your subconscious will completely ignore you because you are not its master. The conscious is not its master. The identity is. And your identity is not the affirmations you tell yourself in the mirror. It is not the temporary confidence you get when you have a pump in the gym. Your identity is what you truly believe about yourself deep down in your subconscious and your unconscious. Anything you try to ignore about yourself, any flaws you try to ignore, insecurities you pretend you don't have, your identity knows. So for example, back when I had the identity and the self-belief of not someone that was hated by everyone, but someone that was just, I didn't think I was a Chad. I didn't think people were particularly interested in me. And at times I did believe that people just didn't like me by default. And because of that identity I held, my subconscious mechanisms I wouldn't notice would cause me to act certain ways, reserve myself, avoid certain things in terms of social interactions. Therefore causing me to act the way that would represent someone who wasn't liked by people, that has social anxiety, that had deep-rooted insecurities. Even when I was consciously trying to be more confident, be more social, all of my subconscious mechanisms, my mind's systems were not they were working the complete opposite direction of that. They were in line with my identity. Even if I was like, hey guys, let's do this, they were like, fuck you. Therefore, if you actually want to fix this, you need to rewire your identity. Essentially, this is discovering your ideal self, what you actually want to be, how it aligns with your goals, the version of yourself that can achieve those goals, and then you need to start to visualize it to the point that you feel emotions around it, and you get to the point where it seems like it's already happened in your visualizations. The thing about the subconscious is it doesn't know the difference between imaginary and real. When people have anxiety attacks, panic attacks over imaginary future events, their body reacts as if it happened in that moment. If you do this consistently over time, you are introducing that new identity over and over and over into your subconscious. However, if you do not cement the identity, it will not stick. Identity cementing is essentially any time you do an action that ideal self of you would do. An obvious example and something I'm sure you can relate to was NoFap. Whenever I was actively getting good streaks and getting to the point where I didn't even think about those things, I was cementing the identity of someone who isn't addicted to pornography. But on the flip side, anytime I relapsed on NoFap, I was uncementing the identity. I was breaking into the cracks. Every time I behaved more outspoken, masculine, confident in public and social situations, especially with people I weren't that familiar with, I was cementing the identity of someone who is confident and has charm socially. And a lot of you may have one single bad habit or thing that you do or mannerism you have that is keeping that bad identity cemented. Regardless of all your conscious efforts that you've been making, trying to progress, it doesn't matter. The rubber band pulls you back to that core identity. And once I learned this and realized that I was still doing actions that were keeping my bad identity, rubber banding me back, I had to completely check myself. I can probably find the journal entry where I straight up say I have not been operating at my highest potential. And in order to prevent the actions that will keep that bad identity, you must become more mindful and self-aware. Because if your mental muscle of mindfulness is weak, you will not be able to do it most of the day, and thus you will unconsciously make the mistakes, relapse, do the bad habits that pull you back with the rubber band. And the best possible exercise for this that completely changed my life is meditation. I think the whole idea around gratitude tends to get a bad rap because us guys view it as this thing that girls do. You know, they got their little gratitude journal and, oh, we don't want to be grateful, we don't want to be satisfied because we want to keep moving forward, right? But that could not be further from the case. You can reap all of these positive benefits from gratitude while not being satisfied with your current life and still striving forward. In fact, gratitude actually increased my progress in life because it allowed me to enter things such as work or exercise with a more positive outlook, which increased my output. Better outlook, better output, Papa John. In fact, research has found that practicing gratitude improves sleep, reduces stress, raises self-esteem, and increases mental strength. And a 2006 study showed that Vietnam veterans who had higher levels of gratitude had lower levels of PTSD. It's also great for relationships because expressing authentic gratitude towards others makes them like you more because you are making them feel good about themselves. So fellas, just hit her with that grateful riz, you know what I'm saying? Hey girl, I sure do appreciate that. I know there's multiple ways to practice gratitude. The most common are obviously journaling and prayer. And one tip I have for that is make sure you are being grateful for these simple things, not a certain amount of money you have or a car you drive, but the fact that, oh, I got to sleep in a bed last night. I have air conditioning. I have a refrigerator with food inside, running water, things like that. But a super powerful way to increase your gratitude instantly is through the ancient Stoic practice of negative visualization. So to do this exercise, you need a subject that is something you typically rely on in your life. This could be a person or a thing. Once you start thinking about all the things you rely on in your day-to-day life, you will find plenty of things to be the subject of these exercises. And then choose a subject and begin to think about how useful it is for you. Is it convenient? Does it bring you joy? And then visualize that from this very point moving forward, it is completely stripped of your life. You will never be with that thing or person again. And imagine the struggles of navigating life without it. Create scenarios in your mind that you would typically rely on this thing or person, and now you can't, and just dwell on it. What would your life look like without it from this point on?
There are a lot of good habits to form. Some are easy, some are hard, but regardless, you typically don't notice the effects of these good habits until after a period of consistency.
And when we try to start these good habits or quit these bad habits, we get that dopamine spike, that initial motivation. We're so compelled to start this. But that initial motivation, that initial decision has done nothing to put the systems in place that actually bring the consistency towards whatever our goals are. So then you fail and you feel shame, frustration.
Perhaps you're even wondering something to yourself along the lines of, can I even do this?
And before you know it, you're stuck in this cycle of unreached goals, which results in an unfulfilling life as you're digging this pit of self-hate and despair. I personally find the idea of that terrifying, and I'm willing to bet that you agree. So in my road to consistency, this is what I found to be the direct causes of failure and how to fix it. The first one is what I like to call the binge fallacy. I found this to be very common when you're trying to break a bad habit, such as drinking, doing drugs,
watching pornography, eating junk food, things like that.
And this is the idea that when you make a mistake or you relapse, that you might as well just go all out now.
You tell yourself something like, well,
I've already done it. I may as well do it some more. I'll get back on track tomorrow. And then you do it numerous times and fully let loose of your self-control, and afterwards you just feel shame. For me, this is exactly what would happen on NoFap. I'd get a little streak going, I'm hyped because I have a little streak, and then maybe I stumble across something or a vulnerable moment happens and I relapse, and then I'm like, well, I already did it, I might as well do it one more time, 3 times, 4 times, one more before bed. And that's typically where I would enter just the most hopelessness, depressed state. As my dopamine receptors have been absolutely fried, I'm absolutely fed up with myself, and then I tell myself, all right, this is it for real, I'm getting on my shit for real, and then it happens again. And this happens extremely often on diets. You see people that are eating clean for a while, and then they'll have just a bite of something, a little cheap snack, a little cheap meal, and then instead of just stopping right there with your little 1,000 calorie mistake, you go all out and have a 6,000 calorie failure. In moments like this, where you've taken a step off the path and the voices inside your head are working relentlessly to get you to drop your discipline and just let loose, that is a very important moment in your journey. That is when you need to exercise that discipline. You need to be like, okay, this happened, I'm gonna work past it, I'm gonna ignore the voices in my head, I'm gonna show willpower, I'm gonna show discipline, I'm gonna show myself that I actually want this, and that's gonna be that. And while obviously it isn't perfect, you still messed up, doing that will help mitigate the damage caused physically and mentally by your little mishap. And the main reason why you end up lacking the drive and discipline to go on is because your why isn't deep enough and it isn't strong enough. If you're trying to achieve that consistency towards your goals, but your why is extremely surface level, it lacks depth, you haven't really fleshed it out, it's no wonder why you fail. Now, I can't tell you exactly what your why is because that's something that we have to dig deep within ourselves to find. However, with myself, a good example is me wanting to achieve financial success. Now, if I go throughout my days with just this surface level why of, oh, I want this car and this watch would be pretty cool, it's perfectly fine to have goals like that and it'll give you that little hit of dopamine here and there, but it is not enough to really compel you towards the discipline required. Now, compared to when I really dig deep on why do I want financial success, I realize that it is because I want true freedom as a man. If I do not achieve that financial freedom, then I am stuck in a lifestyle that I don't want to live. I would be a slave to debt. I would be a slave to an employer. And if you want to get more personal, I wouldn't be able to retire my mother. My mother had me when she was only 16 years old, and from that point on, she had to sacrifice the rest of her childhood to work as hard as she could to achieve a decent life for me, my younger brother, and now my younger baby brothers. So if I would like to be able to retire my mother, if I would like to be able to travel more back home to see my younger brothers as they're growing up and actually be a part of their lives, then I need to be consistent towards both my work and all the self-development around that, because that complements my work, that complements my mental ability, and will raise my ceiling for how much money I can make. One method you could use to really dig deep within yourself and find that why is to picture your antithesis. I want you to picture the future for yourself if you never achieve the consistency you want. In 5, 10, 15, 30 years, what does that look like? Imagine all the suffering, frustration, depression that you would bring upon yourself if you did not achieve consistency in what you're working towards now. Picture this in as much detail as you possibly can, and in that picture you will find all the little whys deep within you that will help you achieve that discipline. However, also this is something that you might need to write down, think about every day, pray on every day, because if you're like me, you will forget your why sometimes. I could have the most compelling why in the world to wake up at 6:30 a.m. every single day, and yet in that moment, my mind is capable of forgetting all that, or at least pushing it into a very small corner of my mind and allowing all the cope, all the excuses, all the persuasion to take front stage. So because of this, you're gonna have to get consistent, I know this is what we're trying to achieve, in remembering your why. You may write it down and read it every day, you may meditate on it every day, pray on it every day. Whatever will keep you from forgetting it will keep you consistent. The next reason's effects are monumental, and it is that you have a poor self-image. You will act like the sort of person you conceive yourself to be. That is said by Maxwell Maltz. He is the writer of the best-selling book, Psycho-Cybernetics. If you subconsciously don't believe in yourself, then you will constantly make unconscious decisions that sabotage your progress. Because deep down, you know that you truly don't believe in yourself. Now, the first method to fix your self-image is visualization. Now, this is not visualizing the bad antithesis like we spoke about earlier. This is envisioning the best case scenario. I want you to imagine and write down exactly what it would feel like if you had a year, 5 years, 10 years of the consistency that you desire. And the more details, the better. Describe exactly what it would look like if you achieved those things. And after you've done that, I want you to sit and visualize as if it's happened. You've achieved it. And allow yourself to bask in that moment. Feel the emotions that you would feel. And when you do this, especially repeatedly, it tells and reprograms your subconscious to think as if it's happened, it's a done deal. And this is because, as Maxwell describes, your nervous system cannot tell the difference between an imagined experience and a real experience. And because of that, you are going to carry out more conscious and subconscious actions towards your goals, towards consistency. And as you make progress, you will begin to see yourself as someone who can actually do these things, which will authenticate your self-image and cement it further, which this is going to compound. This is literally going to reinvent yourself, reprogram your software. The next reason, which kind of ties into the previous reason, is that you are obsessing over the numbers, the streaks, the consistency. You get a little streak going and you're like, wow, I made it to day 10. I can't wait for day 30. And you are going to continue viewing it as a challenge compared to having the mindset of, this is who I am now. This is my life. The days don't matter because I'm doing this forever. Notice how those two phrases reveal drastically different self-images. The first one is like, wow, I've made it this far. This is good for me because I'm the kind of person that doesn't do this, compared to, I am literally the person that does this. See the difference? Also, keep in mind that when you're constantly reminding yourself of the little streak you got going, you're also reminding yourself of what you're trying to avoid, which may result in your mind further trying to push you towards doing the thing that you're avoiding. This one is super common in NoFap because everyone gets so autistic about the numbers. They're like, oh, I'm on day 17, and once I get to day 21, I can levitate. And at day 30, I don't even have to speak to women anymore. They just sprint at me full on naked. So honestly, in your journey, rarely take a look back. Always keep your eyes forward. And finally, what most of you need to hear is that you have to be brutally honest with yourself. And you have to accept that everything that happens in your life is 100% your responsibility. Now I know, obviously you cannot control every little thing that happens to you. However, you can always control how you react to it. If your emotions cause irrational thoughts, which cause you to react a certain way, that is completely on you. And now that you are aware of this, there are no more excuses. There is no more coping. If you fuck up, acknowledge it, learn from it, take responsibility, and continue to move on towards your goals. Now, your first reaction to that may be something negative, or you might feel hopeless, but in reality, you should feel more hope than ever. You should feel free. You have full control over the consistency that you desire, and through these principles, through the right practices, you will achieve it.
So there you have it, the full self-improvement guide. And moving forward, please understand that through this guide, you have access to so many of the answers you needed. Therefore, please do not continue jumping around from video to video, scrolling through TikTok, listening to all these podcasts without any action involved. If you don't mind, please leave a comment on my video. 1, I read them. 2, it will help the video perform well and help other people. And 3, it will inspire people who read the comments to watch the guide and take action. If you want even more depth and would like to learn the entirety of all of my self-development knowledge that will turn you into your elite self in a matter of 30 days or so, consider checking out Mental Mastery in the description below. And finally, because as I enter this next year, I want even more content, even more valuable content, and to create just an amazing community against this fight of unconsciousness, of NPCs, of mediocrity. So you can subscribe to join that. Look, man, I hope this helped you. I hope you've gotten some form of value, a return on investment of your time. Thank you.